Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Smarter webinar entitled UTOPIA is a Necessary Country, Future Workshop in the Context of Engaged Research. So thank you for taking some time away from your busy autumn schedule to connect to this webinar today. And before we start, just some quick notes on the technical side about our webinar today. So as mentioned in the emails, please know that this webinar is recorded and the recording will be published into the Smarter webpage with open access to all the public. And also, please remember to keep your microphone closed throughout the talk of our speaker today. So if you can't hear or you're having other problems with the session, you can write privately in the chat to me. And we will be together online until 1 p.m. today. So after the presentation of our speaker, we will dedicate some time for your questions and debates. So if you have any questions throughout the talk, don't hesitate to write your questions in the chat. And of course, we'll address them after the presentation. So this webinar is kicking off a series of webinars about participatory engagement methods. So in order to say a few words of introduction about this new initiative from Smarter before giving this floor to our speaker today, I'd like to welcome Charles Jacobson from the University of Stavanger, who is leading Smarter Work Package 4 on public engagement.
Thank you, Noel. You are right on time. I thought you were going to give 1 minute more. But hello, everybody, and nice to see several known faces and names. So my name is Charles Jacobson. I'm Director for Innovation and External Collaboration at the University of Stavanger. And I've been heading one of the work packages of a project which is called Smarter. And Smarter is a project which came as an add-on to the ECU University Erasmus project. And there was a dedicated call for, let's say, some possibilities to get more content related to not education. So this was a project which was focused on research mainly. And so within that, we established, let's say, the conceptual approach to establish a virtual research institute at ECU level across 13 members. And then we had some quite a lot of internal funding to make some small, what we call seed projects related to either, let's say, resilient city research approach. And the other big topic was a citizen science approach, which is very specific with what we call the public engagement at large. And then I had the pleasure to lead the work package, one work package related to public engagement at large. And I see two of the main authors here, Tina and Anders. Tina's from Linköping and Anders from University of Stavanger are part here also, with where we made some surveys across the memberships. What is public engagement? How is it perceived? And so forth, experience. And the other thing is to establish or to come up with some conceptual guidelines for the ECU University. And then the last part was a thing that is headed by Noel and Sébastien, which I see somewhere here also, related to public engagement community. We established what we wanted to say, what we are here today, a community of experts working within public engagement, and then share experience, get knowledge about each other, and then to maybe work more, let's say, across our universities together. But we also want to make this a series of webinars where Noel has really taken a great leading a role in that to organize it, and that's very well. So we will have 4 of those. This is the first one, and continue at the end until the end of the Smarter project with it by the end of 2023. I'll just have to flag one thing which you can mark in your calendar. There will be a big research conference in September, probably in Barcelona, which is always very nice in September, related to all topics of Smarter, but also there will be something related to public engagement at large. So you can have this in the back of your head. So if you're a researcher and want to present something either by yourself or with peers from other ECU universities, that could be an interesting alternative for some of you. So on those notes, I think we have achieving quite interesting stuff. And so I'll give the word to Matthias, which has the first, let's say, a presenter in this series. So I don't know what you want to say, something else, Noel, or we just go for Matthias. You have all read the link, which is on our EC webpage about Matthias' extensive experience. That's quite impressive, all the work you have done. So Matthias, the floor is yours, and we're looking forward to hear from you.
Okay, thank you, Trolls, and good morning, everybody. It is still before noon here in Dublin, Ireland, so it is still a good morning. Well, it's a bit of a drizzly, rainy morning, but morning it is. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to kick off this series. It actually takes me back to some of my very early experiences in the context of community development and engaging in activities like future workshops. What I was thinking of doing, and let me just share my slide here. Here we go. This picture, by the way, is from the botanical garden in Vancouver, and it's sort of, I thought it was just quite fitting in terms of maneuvering some of the jungles of engaged research and climbing up high in the trees, reaching for the sunlight and reaching for utopia. What I was thinking of doing today is to give a brief introduction into what future workshops actually are, starting with the person who developed them and made them actually very much a tool of activism in many areas, Robert Jungk. Talk about what future workshops are, what they can do, and give an example of an early future workshop that I had the pleasure to facilitate many years ago in a community development context. Then move on to future workshop as in the context of participatory action research, and talk about some experience that we have been making in a very recent research project here in Ireland. Some of the things we have learned in this project, moving on to contextualizing this particular way of engaging with people and communities and groups in a slightly bigger sort of topic of discussing the necessity for utopian methodologies and utopia as a method in general, and hoping to leave enough time for conversation with you. Because I can only offer a few very limited experiences here, and I'm sure there's a lot of experience assembled in this room, and we should be able to talk about that. Does that sound okay? Okay, so let's move into Robert Jungk. This is him. He was born in Berlin. Passed away in Salzburg in 1994, led a long life, emigrated to Paris early in the 1930s, worked as a documentary filmmaker. He went to the Sorbonne, moved to Prague in the late 1930s, got into trouble for his anti-fascist activities, fled to Switzerland, when the Germans entered Prague, and stayed there in Switzerland until the end of the Second World War. He was a freelance journalist. He worked for several papers, including The Observer, and he covered the Nuremberg trials after the Second World War in Germany. From early on, he began to explore topics and themes that dominated really the rest of his life and his activities, questions about future, peace, and most importantly, anti-nuclear activity. And I first came across his work in the context of the campaign for nuclear disarmament and the anti-nuclear movement in Germany in the 1970s and 80s. He has a number of quite well-known books, including his very first one, The Future Has Already Begun. And he then moved into more systematically investigating topics about the future of modern society, found the first Institute for Research into the Future in 1953, worked with Bertrand Russell on the international anti-nuclear and anti-nuclear arms campaigns, and was involved in activities like the World Federation for Future Research. And he began during this time in the 1960s to develop future workshops as a means for people, for communities to come together to envision desirable futures and means of how to achieve them. So it was really about sort of how can ordinary people, and that sort of in a way gives us a link to John Dewey if you want, ordinary people gain power and control over their lives. He founded the International Futures Library in Salzburg, Austria. And in general, his life was a mix of scholarship, activism, peace initiatives, and specifically focusing on the challenges and the dangers of nuclear war and nuclear power. So his books, Brighter Than 1,000 Suns, still a very important read on nuclear. He was deeply involved in the peace movement, obviously. He lectured, he participated in marches, demonstrations, and before he sadly passed away in 1994, he was the candidate of the Green Party for Austria's presidential elections. And there's a web link here where you can find much more detailed information about his life. So that's the person behind the future workshops, and they have since spread across Europe mainly, but I've seen them in many in contexts outside of Europe as well, used for all sorts of initiatives, from urban planning, community development, to organizational development, to development of specific policies. What is a future workshop? It's not rocket science. It is actually the main thought and the main thinking behind a future workshop really is to separate out the mess that we create in our heads when we approach a controversial topic. And quite often, when you get into a discussion, and if you have a town hall meeting, or you've all been at those, there's a whole mix and mess of people complaining about the status quo, having ideas about where we should be going. Somebody always coming in saying, but that has been tried before and it didn't work, and that's never going to work. Somebody said, oh, if we only had enough money, and somebody says, actually, I don't like the way this is organized here. And everything is just a huge, big hodgepodge, and you can't get anywhere. A future workshop basically offers a separation of these steps very systematically. It can be organized. I mean, you can do mini future workshops over 2 hours. I wouldn't recommend it. We have to talk about time a bit further on. But really what it is not, it is a moderated process for people coming to come together around a specific topic of that concerns them, where they need to come to a shared understanding of what the issue is, what the problem is, who has the problem, come together to developing desirable solutions to change that reality. And thirdly, to actually take first steps towards to make that desirable utopia actually a reality. And so the three phases, the critique, the fantasy, and the realization, are really the core of a future workshop, and they can be spread out over a week or several weeks. They can be squeezed into a session of 2 hours, and as I said, I would not recommend that. They have to be prepared, so you have to organize as you would for any town hall meeting or something. You have to organize your premises, your rooms, make sure that there is facilitation, that there's enough material for people to actually sit together, work, talk, have enough information as an input. Probably, depending on the topic, organize input from external speakers if needed. Then go through these three phases, and then in the third phase, that is called realization here, of course, organize how to follow up on that final phase. And I'm just going to give you a few images here from a workshop, a future workshop we facilitated in the early 2000s in a community in Germany. I'm not going to tell you where it is. And this is what it looks like. So you can see the environment, some suburban neighborhood, not too far from a major city in Germany. Issues with services, with accessibility of services for children and youth, but also with the general sort of infrastructure and usability of that neighborhood for the community. We organized that future workshop with in one of the local schools, and with parents, with families from the local early childhood setting, with young people from the youth center, and you see them all here working with information from the local and national press, basically coming together to do sort of a roundup of what are the issues we're facing here, what is the problem what are the problems that make it so difficult for families, children, young people to live in this neighborhood. And that went on for quite a while. I think we spent 2 days doing that. So another important element of the preparation is to make sure that everybody is fed, that there's tea and coffee and food for everybody, so we can work together. We moved into developing creative solutions, and you can see this is all in the pre-digital age. So we've been working with huge sheets of paper and post-it notes, which I would recommend doing, because it is a much more sort of a communicative and interactive way of documenting the process of the group as you're doing it. People split up into several working groups and spend several days really moving into that fantasy phase. And the rules are very clear. And I think that this is something that has to be guided by an experienced facilitator. The rules are set from the beginning. We start with this critique phase, and the critique phase is about there are no limits to what's allowed in terms of voicing complaints, critique about that particular situation that we're addressing. But that phase comes to an end, and it has to be clearly marked, and that's another good opportunity for a break of a day or two, or more coffees and teas and soups and baklava and whatever you have. And then you move into that fantasy phase, and it is called fantasy for a reason, because again, there are no limits for the thinking, and you have to prepare this with a lot of creative materials. There's balloons, there's Play-Doh, there's all sorts of paper. It is about limitless utopian thinking. And any attempt at this stage from anybody to say, actually, I don't think that's going to work, that is immediately shut down, because we're in this in this utopia phase. It's quite difficult for people to free themselves to do that. But again, this is where experience facilitation comes in, to actually make sure that people engage in that. And you can have plays, and you can have games, you have a role play, whatever. So these groups, for instance, they started working with the plans. So you see some children engaging in redefining the neighborhood. We have discussions talking about redirecting, channeling consumer attitudes into activities in the community. We have some serious sort of utopian thinking happening here in a group of men who sort of gravitated together, and all that went on for quite a while. And then again, there is a break, and it's quite useful to have that break over a day at least or so, and then come together again for that third phase when it comes to realization. And this is some of the things, some of the utopian presentations are being broken down into how do we develop steps towards them. So we can see some more structured planning happening here on the top. Oops, sorry. On the top left-hand side of the screen, we can see a redefining of the public space happening in the drawings and the maps. What is happening to my screen? We can see more soup arriving, always important, and we can see role play. And this is a city council meeting which is being rehearsed here. How do we bring? How do community groups bring their experiences to the city council? What are the arguments that we're bringing to them? So all this is played out in that realization phase. That sort of is a broad overview of what might happen in a future workshop, what happened here. I facilitated many future workshops in many other contexts. This is just one example. So boiled down, this is the idea behind it, really, that you start from a status quo, from a, and I'm using the terminology of utopia here quite deliberately. You start from a reality, which is the living situation in that particular neighborhood, in this particular town, in a European country. So you start from a real place, which is the utopia, the utopos, the reality number one, and you move it into the non-space that also sort of is a connotation of the term of utopia, the utopos, the space that does not yet exist. And of course, you bring it down to a new utopia, an existing real space, a utopos, which is a new reality, but if things go well, and my experience is they tend to go well, at a changed level of level and community understanding and action that comes out of this. So that's the basically the theory and the practice behind it. More recently, in the context of participatory action research, we conducted a project that we're writing up at the moment. So the first publication is in print, actually, as we speak. It's a project called Pedagogies of Hope, and it is about exploring play opportunities for young children in urban environment in Dublin, in Ireland. We've been working with 2 family resource centers here in Dublin, one in the north inner city of Dublin City and one on the outskirts of Dublin City. And both environments where the living conditions for families and children are quite restrained in terms of open spaces, in terms of play opportunities, in terms of substandard and housing for families. And so we had quite a long connection to these two centers. And so we decided together that we would engage in this kind of sort of more systematic research project, exploring play opportunities for young children in these environments and what to do about them. So working with children, families, early child educators at these two family resource centers. And this was a joint project between our center here at DCU. And here's the DCU team. I had the pleasure and honor to coordinate this project as the PI, my colleagues Marlene McCormack and Ashlyn Silk from DCU, and Maynooth University, Annette Kearns, Leo Toole, Patsy Stafford, and Trina was there. Trina Stokes from the Maynooth team. And the whole thing was funded by the Fribble Trust in London in the UK. What we did to merge our approach to an action research project with the actual sort of community engagement in a future workshop, we slightly amended the approach to the future workshop. So we had an extended preparation phase on site in the two family resource centers. So we worked with educators, with families in those two centers, Hill Street and Ballymun. And it was really about establishing a relationship, establishing trust, establishing a sort of an understanding of what we would jointly address in all this. So that first phase, the critique phase of the future workshop, was actually an extended problem analysis that went on for several weeks on site or on these two sites. We then organized for the utopian, for the fantasy phase, a whole day, just one day of playful encounter at the university campus. So we brought everybody to St. Patrick's campus, and some of you will have seen it. We have this beautiful green space outside of our buildings where we spent a whole day playing, observing children, families, parents, and observing their children engaging in activities that they wouldn't not naturally be able to engage in the centers or in their living environment. And we blended this into the realization phase, and that is still ongoing. So we had the city council, Dublin City Council, participating in that day, and we're following up with this now. So we're moving into working with Dublin City Council on their municipal play strategy. And we followed up by presenting our work, discussing our work at the Child in the City conference. So these are ongoing processes. And here's just sort of a little, just a little glimpse of what happened there. At some stage, we had to move inside because of the weather, but we had some fascinating insights into children's preferences, and it wasn't so much for us, but it was mainly for educators and families and parents to actually identify things that their children loved doing, and there were some very surprising elements in that. So what have you learned from all this as researchers? And I suppose it really comes down to these three bullet points here. One is time is critical, and time is not always available when you're constrained by the limitations of research project in the reality of a university, people's teaching loads and people's many other commitments and responsibilities. But time is critical, and if we were to do this project again, we would make sure from the beginning that we would protect even more time for the engagement with our participants in that project. It has been confirmed that coming together for meals and actually talking over food is a critical element of a successful research project, and because this is where the analysis and really begins to unfold between different participants. What we have learned is hopefully a good dose of humility as researchers, and how to position researchers in such a relationship. And I think it really sort of it's underpinned, it's underlined by this quote from Thomas Schwand some years ago, where he says, coming to an understanding in context of human realities, it's all about dialogic processes in which one participates, an activity, not an activity which one exercises methodological control. And this is something that, of course, we all subscribe to as researchers in that field, but we have to learn it again and again and again, that you can come up with a wonderful plan, but as soon as you engage in activities with others, you give up methodological control. And you can reflect on that. And it is sometimes something that is hard to acknowledge for social scientists, but this is where the music is in projects like this. So I suppose really drawing this into this discussion about why Utopia, the Future Workshop is just one, well, in a way, very practical approach to addressing something that I believe is quite important. Is becoming even more important as we speak in our societies, that a lot of our futures have been handed over to some understanding of a technocratic management of an inevitable future, and we've given up on our own dreams, our own aspirations, and communities' dreams and aspirations and utopias. And there's, of course, a whole sort of a body of work around this, and there's a few links, a few sort of titles at the bottom. Of course, Eric Olin Wright's work of envisaging real utopias and the Real Utopia project back in the mid-2000s, 2010, if somebody wants to look that up. Ruth Levitas and her group and her 2013 book, Utopia as a Method, that discusses the need for utopian thinking in not just in research, but in reimagining who we are as a society. Brazilian writer Humberto Unger, who talks about the connection between social theory and radical democracy. And I would argue that the Future Workshop is one tool to empower and to invite processes of radical local democracy. And if you wondered about the title of this presentation, Utopia is a Necessary Country, this is obviously, it's a quote from our president, Michael D. Higgins, who says that one of the weaknesses of the left is that it has not drawn on the richness of its own utopian inheritance, reminding us that we need a discourse to envisage the alternative, an inclusive society, new social economies. He refers to Ernst Bloch in that philosophical space here, who writes about anticipatory illumination. And it's in general reclaiming that space where it's not about the right solely to survive, but our right as communities to flourish. And this is, of course, the huge challenge and the opportunity by introducing this methodology into a research space about an opportunity to contribute to a changing that discourse. So I'm going to stop here. I'm going to bring it back to one of our very important influences in our work, Paulo Freire, obviously, who talks about that. And I think this leads back to the structuring of the future workshop. He says it's not enough to actually live in hope, but he says hope as an ontological need, as he defines it, demands an anchoring in praxis. And I think this is really what a future workshop methodology can offer, a space to open up for hope, but then sort of bring it back into anchoring that utopian thinking, that hope, into practice, into joint action, and into joint knowledge creation. And I think this is all I have to offer. Here are some further readings. I'm happy to share this presentation if you want to look that up. And well, that is it. Thank you very much. And I would be very interested in hearing your thoughts and questions and insights.
I think the more you talk, the more the questions coming up, I think. Thank you very much, Matthias, for a very interesting presentation. I recommend those who haven't seen the message that use the chat if you want to send questions, or do like Ryan, raise your hand. So first out, Ryan. You raised your hand, didn't you, or did you?
Sorry, no, I was just applauding, but Noel has some questions, I think, in the chat.
Okay, some questions are coming in. So as you can read them also, Matthias. You say Matthias or Matthias? Or yeah, I don't.
Well, it's Matthias. It's Matthias. German ancestry.
Yeah. So the first question is more how the instruction communication you give to participants prior to these workshops.
Well, I suppose that is really where the preparation comes in, because you don't just rush into a future workshop. There's usually a number of meetings, encounters, or as I said in the example of our most recent project, a phase that can go on for weeks, where you actually sort of engage with that community, establish trust. And then when you come to a decision, we're going to do a future workshop. This is where you introduce the rules of the game, basically, where you say, this is what we're going to do. We're going to work through these 3 phases. These are the rules. And of course, once you get into doing it, and once you assemble in a school or in a community hall or whatever the venue is, you have to make that visible. So it is something that really works best with huge sheets of paper, flip charts, post-its, posters on the wall reminding people of we're in that critique phase now, reminding people of the structure of the schedule, the time, saying we're doing this now for today and tomorrow. This is where when the coffee breaks are. This is what this is about. And you start this by introducing it at the beginning of the day. You bring everybody together. You get into working, and that, depending on the group size, people might split up into smaller groups and then come together again. And then, of course, you round up the day. You say this is, or that phase. You say, you make visible the product of that group, the collective product of that group, and it stays on the wall, and for everybody to see, this is what we produced collectively. These are the issues we've identified. This is our critique of the current situation of living in this particular neighborhood, for instance, or of the reality that our children face when it comes to play opportunities in the north inner city of Dublin.
Thank you. You see the questions are popping in, so you can read them too. So yeah. I don't have to read the whole question. I was just wondering, you said before you can, in the meantime, you said this with the example you have from Germany. And then it was citizens who were involved there, or how do you define the, let's say, the wideness of the stakeholders engaged there? I mean, do you have the authorities coming in also, or?
Well, I mean,
not?
it is the particular example from that German Future Workshop that was in a community development process. So it was by invitation. So we had contacts to the local schools, to the youth centers, to the early childhood centers. And through their networks, we opened this up to an invitation to the community. So we had posters, we had invitations, we had leaflets distributed sometime before saying, come join us next Thursday, whatever, and that goes back to Noel's question in terms of time. You have to sort of have discussions before that, what it might actually work for people, because you can't just sort of set a time and expect people to free themselves up. So you might have to have discussions. Would it be better to do this on a weekend or over several weekends? Can we have evening sessions? Is there a holiday period where it might be possible for people to come together for a couple of days? That's the preparation phase that you have to go through. And then, of course, yeah, there was an open invitation. Leaflets were distributed. Come and join us. Future workshop. Everybody welcome in several languages. And that's what you do. And Andreas, your question about the role of researchers in the follow-up phases. I think you're right. And I think there is a huge responsibility, especially for researchers engaging in participatory action research in general, because I mean, a lot of participatory action research projects, whatever methodology you use, there's a lot of action and there's participation in that particular moment, but then things sort of disappear and peter out. And I think if we want to take our responsibilities seriously as researchers, we have to really understand that we're not just facilitators of the workshop. This is not just about a fun activity. It is fun usually if it's well organized, but it is about the collective creation of new knowledge and new insights that can lead to new practices. And as researchers, we have a responsibility to work with that new knowledge. And this is where it's not just about feeding back into the community, but also about taking this further, taking this into the space where we can have even academic discussions about sort of that the knowledge we're creating in these processes that are not entirely under our control, but also in terms of scribes and to some extent, not necessarily spokespersons, but maybe door opener can be a way, can be word to use here, but I would be very careful in my choice of words here. But things like bringing what had happened in this particular workshop into the policy space, into the city council of that German community, into Dublin City Council, who are developing a play strategy for the entire city. I think we have a responsibility as researchers to engage in these processes. And of course, that again is another sort of opportunity to bring that knowledge creation to another level, because that is, of course, another research side to see what happens with the results of local democratic dialogic engagement in that policy space. And we should pay very close attention to what's happening there. Not sure that makes a lot of sense, but
Anders, do you want to reflect on that? I mean, we're having we are partner. Both Jens and Anders, we're part of this NEPSTAR project, where, as you know, it's a Bauhaus project, and where it is a lot about citizens and should have a, I don't know, a good life or something like that. There is a heading for that.
Yep.
And as I understood, Anders and Jens, they are planning a series of workshop now with citizens. So maybe if one of them want to reflect there a little.
Yes, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, actually.
Anders, you are muted. I can't hear you.
Yeah, so thanks, Matthias. And also Helene, who's on the call, she's from the city of Stavanger, so so we're working closely with her. But yeah, I think I have, these are two things that we are reflecting on right now, is like, how do we take it from the workshop and into the policy making process, and how do we, and so there it's also about like this creation of political subjects, but also training in political, like how do you engage in political negotiations for these groups? So that's one thing we are really focused on. And then I think the other thing that we also, and maybe you could reflect on that also, like when you invite into a future workshop, usually we cannot be too many people, because then you sort of lose that intimate atmosphere. So I guess I have two questions to that. So we are discussing like, how do we define what group, like what makes up a group that we want to engage with, right? So that's the first question. Is it based on class, gender, race, location, whatever it can be? And then the other part is, if we only have like 12 people in the workshop, how do we, is there a way for them to take it back to their broader groups and discuss, like, this is what we figured out in the workshop, and then you can start from there to say like, well, the realization phase really has to be sort of in dialogue with the larger community of people. Yeah, I don't know if that made sense.
Yeah. Well, I mean, two thoughts. I mean, you just said at the beginning, you said, how do we move that on into the policy space for the people we work with? And I think that's the first trap, actually. It's not for, it's with. And I think that that is really important, that we don't fall back into that role as the ones who then sort of who are the messengers for a community. We have a role with that community in the policy space. So I think that is really important for us as researchers to reflect on all the time. In terms of the group size, I mean, I always found larger groups much more productive. 30, 40, 50 people, because you can divide the group, the whole group up into smaller groups for parts of the engagement. You can have the children sort of organize a guided tour through their neighborhood and take pictures. You can have the people mix. You can have the more serious, I don't know. You saw that one picture of the men who were all sort of drawn to each other and engaged in serious planning, and so you can have all that. But I would think a group of 12 participants, I would try to open that up and actually and see, can we get many more people? And then of course, yes, you have to sort of, that again, preparation. How do we reach communities? How do we make sure that we don't only reach those whose voices are always heard? How do we make sure that we reach out to those in the community whose voices are quite often silenced in those processes? That is part of the preparation, understanding of what's going on in that community. It's about spaces again, and we've tried that in all sorts of spaces, in libraries, in school halls, in kindergartens, early childhood centers, depending what in church halls, whatever's available. And but I would really spend more time in the preparation to come to an understanding of what's actually happening in this community, and who are the actors, who are the agents, who are the usual suspects of self-selected, articulate people who are always on the forefront. How do we open this up, and how to invite and create a safe space for those who usually would not feel welcome in these circles? And that is a responsibility for the preparation, for the planner, but also when we take this seriously, this notion that this is about a new or an alternative way of creating a radical, I would actually call it a radical alternative of creating new collective knowledge, then this is a research responsibility to make sure that we don't stay in this small group of self-selected, be they experts or just people who always speak up for themselves.
Thank you, Matthias. There is a question there, which is slightly related to what you answered here from Ryan, sorry. But Helene first has a question.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Matthias. I was just reflecting now on sort of the structuring, or that we need a structure to work within, but still what we're doing is to try to find a way to handle iteration and coincidences. And my experience now from working with the Discipline Stavanger in this next project that Chris mentioned, we have now established a temporary office at one of the sites that we're in. Okay. And that allows us for engaging with the community, going to the shops, buying coffee, talking with inhabitants, and sort of breaking up those structures just by merely just being a person, really, and using this and becoming one of them, and also then establishing trust. So I think it would be interesting if you have any reflections on sort of how we can view those workshops, the future workshops, and those structured incidents as part of a whole long-term process. I mean, do you have any experience on this, or?
Well, I mean, there's a long history, and actually, I'd really love to see what you're doing. I was just privately messaging Charles there. I'm actually going to be in Stavanger on Monday, and Monday and Tuesday for some work at the university. I was just wondering, would it be possible to catch up and meet for a coffee and have a conversation about what you're doing there? Because I'd be really interested to learn more about it.
Absolutely. Let's just get in touch.
Yeah, let's talk after that. No, but to your question, I suppose there is a tradition going back to the 1970s and 80s, and there are a lot of treasures that we can sort of rediscover. There was a movement of I think they were called science shops or something. You know, it's a bit like universities or academics opening a corner shop where there was a person, and there was sort of a permanent presence of for engagement and for people to drop in and say, actually, we have this issue here in the community, and how would we go about finding this out? So I think this can happen, but I think this is different to what happens at a future workshop. I think a future workshop is once you decide upon, here's the issue, this is the topic, this is something that's been bothering us very specifically. So you have to sort of draw the boundaries around. It can't, a future workshop can't be about anything and everything at the same time. So you have to give it a topic, and the topic is identified with the community, and then it's a structured process to work through these issues. And of course, if that is then followed up by a permanent presence, a permanent engagement, that is fabulous. But there are two different roles. They're connected, but the future workshop is really about, we've identified the play situation as a really critical issue here for our children. And what are we going to do about it?
Sure. The two questions from Ryan. One is about the interaction with the university. I mean, which space are we doing this into?
Yeah.
I mean, you have mentioned some examples about, you said church, I think, or did I hear wrong? But some areas in town, to say it like this. And then how does the university be as a player? And then the other question is how we keep up the following, which you partly mentioned here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in terms of space, you just have to be pragmatic. I mean, you have to sort of just see what's available, and I mean, and that's quite often it is spaces in schools, it's places in sometimes there are community halls. I mean, it really depends on, and again, that's part of the preparation, and then of course identifying the physical space goes along with identifying what are the barriers to accessing this space. So is everybody welcome? If not everybody is welcome, the space is not suitable. If the space is sort of connected to a particular, and you mentioned church halls, I mean, a church hall as a space is usually just great to use. Is this a space where everybody feels welcome? Or where everybody feels I can just come in there and be myself without being judged for who I am? And I think these are the questions, and I suppose you want to do this in a way that is accessible. A wonderful colleague of mine who set up a community network of children's services in the UK many years ago. She said all the services have to be in pram pushing distance. That was her phrase. So if you look at where the services are, they have to be pram pushing this distance. Everything else doesn't work. And I suppose that's exactly what we're talking about here, accessibility. But then the university also offers an opportunity to get out of that familiar space, to actually move into a space that is different, that has other opportunities. And that for us, it was a question of an encounter between those two community groups, because they're from two different parts of town. And we wanted the engagement of everybody in one space. So do we go to this side of town or that side of town? Or do we open up a third space? And we just looked at our beautiful green space in front of on our campus and said, this is it, we're going to do it here. And that worked. But then, of course, again, this is not just about the green space in front of our beautiful red brick building in DCU. It is also about the university as a space that opens up to community, a space that is non-threatening, where you can enter a university in just the most natural way. And universities and higher education institutions can, of course, be inviting, but they can also be threatening spaces. And so I think there is a bit of an opportunity to bring universities into the community and bring community into the university.
Yeah, and something about the pram distance. Some universities are a little outside of center city.
Well, that's true. And I mean, in our specific case for this play engagement day, we had to organize buses and stuff. There are limits to the pram pushing, but when you do it in the community, pram pushing distance, I think, is what you're aiming for.
Thank you. Anybody has a final question? Otherwise, I think the time is now running up. So, Matthias, we're looking forward to see you next week in Stavanger. That's nice, coming over, and we can exchange mail here and organize something. Otherwise, thank you to Noel and Insa for organizing this. I suddenly see Sebastián. Hello, Sebastián.
Hello, just maybe Ryan has a last question. Sorry to... Ryan wanted to ask one question, if I can.
If we can be brief, I guess, since it is out of time. But yeah, you said that we can't, the initial idea of each, how that's generated, because you said you have to bring everyone together around a specific topic to discuss. You can't just imagine utopia about everything. Yeah. But this initial point of how we can come to consensus on what you're talking about, that process is very interesting to me, because that requires a lot of, I mean, you're bringing in a lot of different people, a lot of different perspectives that we have to come to consensus on what we're working on. And I think if you have, maybe I missed at the beginning, or if you can be brief about that, it would be nice to kind of hear your thoughts on how you do initiate that process.
Well, I mean, you probably don't initiate it, and I think that's another sort of, I think it's an important element of what's the role of the researcher in this. And you sometimes you are in engagement with that community already, sometimes you're not. Sometimes you're approached by some community group or a community spokesperson or something, and then that messy process of trying to figure out what's the case, what's actually going on, what's the issue, what's the problem, who has the problem, not what is the problem. That is quite often the more important question. That is already a question of dialogue, of sort of critical listening. And the role of the researcher in this is to, in a way, be close, but also maintain a critical distance at that stage, because you can talk to 5 different people and they can be very clear about what the problem is. And quite often it's the other person or the other group or something. So you have to be very careful in sort of trying to identify what is actually going on, filtering this through and feeding it back to the community and saying, actually, from listening to you, my understanding is this is what might be going on. Would you agree? And so it's an iterative process. But it's quite important, and it can be quite messy at the beginning. And then again, I really believe that this the structuring of the future workshop in these phases helps to actually make sure to overcome that messiness and come to sort of proposals and solutions and next steps that are carried by everybody.
On those final words, I will say thank you, Matthias. Thank you all for participating at this workshop. Thank you to Noel for organizing it. And then hopefully we'll meet in some 2-3 months for the next workshop with another topic. Thank you all. Bye
Thank
for
you,
now.
everyone. Thank you, Matthias.
Thank you very much.